I apologize for my cough. I really, really have a bad health situation in the last couple of weeks. Anyway, Caleb, thank you very much for joining, for waking up this early. I know it's very, very early for you. I appreciate it. I love your work. I love your approach to astrology. I love how you implemented your love for music in astrology as well. I think it's beautiful. And I know you're going to talk about something today about Mars. So tell me, why Mars, and what is all about Mars? Tell me more.
Definitely. You said it's early over here, and that's true, but I realized that when you picked the time, it was very fitting because the planetary hour of Mars started right at 6:30 here where I live. So, it was on the nose, I think, you know? Yeah, so the reason I in part wanted to talk about Mars is because Mars is in Scorpio right now, right? We've had Mars in Scorpio for I think just over a week and a half or so now. And this is actually the first time that we've had Mars in one of its home signs since 2022, right? I think that was like Mars in Aries in the middle of the summer last year. So it's been a while since we've had like a strong and effective Mars in domicile, right? So that was
Good.
the principal reason that I wanted to talk about Mars, feeling that it was like a moment when the planet Mars is sort of stepping into the spotlight. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I think we need a strong Mars. I feel that Mars in Gemini, that was in 9 months in Gemini or something. Everybody was
Yeah,
so
that was
tired of that.
ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah, especially me. All over my Gemini placements, which I have a lot. So yeah,
Oh
I
yeah,
like
yeah. I'm sure that was a chaotic time. But yeah, by the end of it, we were all ready for anything but Mars and Gemini, I feel.
yeah.
And now that we're like we have Mars in Scorpio, it's interesting that what's actually happened is Mars disappeared behind the beams of the sun, right? When planets approach certain degrees within orb of the sun, they disappear behind the sun's rays. That happened when Mars was in fall in exile in Libra, and we won't see Mars again until it is in Capricorn, and then it will emerge out of the sun's beams and be visible once more. But during that sort of process of invisibility, Mars will have a conjunction with the Sun in November on the 17th at 25 degrees of Scorpio, which we can think of as like a reset moment, like a new moon moment for Mars. Mars's synodic cycle with the Sun, it varies in length because Mars's orbit is kind of like asymmetrical, or in terms of like Venus is a very symmetrical synodic cycle, right? Whereas Mars is rough, it's erratic, right?
Okay.
But it's about
So it doesn't
25
make any. Yeah, it
months.
doesn't make any nice shapes like Venus. Venus does
No, it
the
doesn't
five
create
point
a
star.
there's no beautiful five-pointed flower in the sky created by Mars's synodic cycle. But yeah, so it will be the start of a new like 2-ish year long campaign is how I think of like Mars, a Mars cycle, right? So it's this, we're approaching this moment that I see as being a good point for like seeding new endeavors, thinking about it as like, gathering your supplies before you march out. We can invoke war metaphors here, like to battle or what have you, right? I think now is a moment where like Mars is in like the Rocky training montage, right? Preparing, getting ready. So it's like a good time for our own reflections on like what did we spend the past 2 years fighting for? What were our victories? What were our losses? And then like what do we see is worth fighting for in the future? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I love it. I love it. I love that it's 2 year cycle, because in 2 years we can actually do something and see, some manifestations of it, right? 2 years is
Sure.
enough time to do things and to see the fruits of your labor or whatever you're fighting for, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the last one, the last Mars Sun conjunction happened in October of 2021. So like just over 2 years ago. That was, I think, in the middle of a Mercury retrograde too. So it's like this triple conjunction of like a retrograde Mercury, an exiled Mars, and the Sun also in fall. So it was like a pile up not nearly as auspicious of a start to the cycle, right? A little bit messier start than this one where we'll have Mars and Scorpio. So I guess the main, like, there's the timing component, like the seasonal component for like my desire to talk about Mars. But then beneath that, there's also this desire to like rehabilitate both the malefics, like both Mars and Saturn, and knowing that they rule experiences which are subjectively negative, largely and for the most part. I think we tend to keep them at a distance, or there's a desire to keep the malefics at a distance, right? Because they govern, all sorts of occurrences in
Yeah.
life, energies in life that most people do not like, right?
I know. I have a
But
conjunction in my natal chart. I have a
oh,
Mars Saturn
really?
conjunction in
Ooh,
Leo, like strong, like
ooh.
under half a degree. So
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah. So
I know
I
the
love that.
energy. I know the
Yeah,
energy.
you got some strong malefic energy in your chart. That's great. Um, but they're
But they're gonna
unavoidable,
try.
right?
Sorry, they're gonna try now, right? So in Saturn, Pisces, and
Mhm.
Mars in Scorpio. So what do you feel it's gonna be this month?
Oh, sure. Well, I see when the malefics are connected by a trine, it's the like most functional time to work with them together. And although there's not a whole lot that Saturn can offer Mars while in Pisces, right? Because
Mhm.
Saturn's a little out of his element in Pisces. At the very least, any time Mars and Saturn are configured, Mars can, you know, be this workhorse, right? And Mars or Saturn can give him structure or like a to-do
Mhm.
list. It's like, oh,
It,
you have all this energy.
it's productive.
Is
Do
productive.
you think it's gonna be
Yeah.
productive even? Yeah, yeah, because Mars is in Scorpio in domicile, so it's gonna, although Saturn is not at home, but still it's gonna help it, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. Certainly. I think of it as being like, Saturn can really teach you how to approach things with a sense of longevity. And although like Mars and Scorpio already is sort of this tireless workhorse, um, Saturn and
mhm.
Pisces can sort of extend Mars's stamina, the ability to work at something and sort of stay with it even when it's uncomfortable. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and you have
So,
a
yeah.
focus, like you have that focus and sharp, like I'm always thinking when this combination comes, of archery, when you have like you have
Yeah.
to point of that target, right? And you have that focus to see the bullseye, right?
Yeah. You have to, I think that's a good image for Saturn, because Saturn provides containment. I think what I was thinking of was like horse blinders and
Oh,
how if you want to direct a
okay.
horse in a certain direction, you almost like restrain their vision, right, to what's immediately before them. But you're right, like an archer has to do that too, to like sort of ignore anything distracting around them so that they can like just keep their eye on the prize, right? So no, that's a good image for sure.
Yeah, but horse blinders are also cool. I like that.
Yeah.
So, before we go on, what is your Mars placement?
I've got Mars in Libra actually. So I've
Okay.
got Mars. I've got Mars in exile. I just had my Mars return. While Mars was conjunct the South Node. That was fun. Um,
Okay.
but I know, right? But I've got Mars trine Saturn in my own chart, and it's like the tightest aspect in my chart. So it's like, oh, no wonder I love the malefic planets.
Oh, yeah, that's for sure. Oh, yeah, of course, because you have now your Saturn return coming as well, right? I know you just turned 30.
Yeah, I had my
So
Saturn return in
recently.
Aquarius.
Oh, in Aquarius. So it
Yeah,
went already past. Okay,
yes,
cool. So
yeah.
nice. Okay.
Um,
Oh yeah, Aquarius and Libra together. I like that. Yeah, yeah. But
yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's very intellectual. That's smart. And you're Virgo. Yeah, of course you're a good astrologer. No wonder.
Thanks.
Go on. Sorry, I
Um,
digress. I'm a Gemini, a strong Gemini, so I always digress. My apologies. Go ahead.
no, yeah, what I love about Geminis in conversation is they're usually the people where it's like a point is raised and they're like, well, have you thought about these six other things? Um,
all the angles, right? I
Yeah.
have to perceive, well, from this point of view, what about this point of view? Maybe this one, yeah. That's why I love
Completely.
astrology, and different schools of astrology. I know you have you use also Hellenistic astrology in your work, which I don't practice, but I know a
Mm-hmm.
little bit about it. I've been watching Chris Brennan and his podcast for
Sure.
years. I was listening, right? So I although I don't practice it, I find it interesting,
Sure.
right? Because it's a different point of approach to the same thing.
Totally.
And there was a book recently, one of my astro friends told me this guy wrote a book. He gave 12 different astrologers, different school of astrology,
Okay.
the same chart,
Oh.
and they talked about the chart. I'm gonna talk to Amelia about it so we can post about it, so she can post the pictures. It's very good. So she said 12 different approaches, but they all came to the same conclusions at the end. So isn't it
Whoa.
amazing?
That's
I feel it's very interesting.
that's
Yeah.
pretty fascinating. I would love to read that.
Yeah, I'm gonna tell Amelia to post it, so I'm gonna reshare it from her so everybody knows. Yeah, that's cool. Okay, go back to Mars.
So one thought I had been sitting with recently was like, okay, most martial experiences are things none of us would ever want to undergo, and things that I hope nobody would ever have to undergo, right? Because Mars rules very acute forms of pain. Like Mars, like Saturn is chronic, but Mars is acute, right? These very, it is the hand that is placed on the hot stove top, and then immediately retracted, right? Like, oh my God, that's hot. But yeah, like so, I have Mars in Fallen, or I have Mars in Exile in the first, and I've been in a couple different car accidents, right? Like my body has been harmed by Mars at different points, so
Wow.
none of us would ever want to experience these things, like war and sort of general, acute form of suffering, breaking a bone, things like that. But if even if
But I'm
we were to, was that?
now just thinking, because it's trining Saturn. Although you had
Sure.
those accidents, Saturn gave you the ability to long-term recover. You know what I'm saying? Like he gave you the that strength of Saturn to recover. This was just a thought, maybe. I don't
Yeah.
know.
I mean, luckily in those instances, it was never anything that, left me like, uh, worse for wear long term. So I never thought about that. But yeah, I think perhaps there was a little bit of cushion from my strong Saturn placement there. Um, but yeah, so it's like, well, if we were to eradicate all car accidents, all war, like all ill forms of Mars, like we would still have Mars though in the birth chart. We would still have transiting Mars in the sky. So what are ways that we can like embody Mars in a healthy way? Or how can we see Mars as necessary or like an integral part of our astrological system rather than just like a villain or, this undesirable thing? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Right?
but it keeps us going. I mean, without Mars, as you
Mhm.
said, what do we do without Mars? That was your tagline, which I loved. It keeps us going. We would just be flat. We would be
Yeah,
just a lump on the floor. No movement, no energy, no nothing, right?
right. Which I guess raises a good Mars keyword, which would be friction, right? Which can
Mhm.
be the friction of conflict or just the friction of approaching a challenge, right? The healthy friction experienced when, for instance, one is butting up against the limits of their own abilities, right? Like we talked about the Rocky training montage earlier, but like even just working out, like when you're hitting that moment where you're like, oh, I've never lifted this much weight before and my muscles are straining and my lungs are gasping for air, but you lean into that friction and then find on the other side, some sense of mastery, right? Some sense
Yeah.
of dominating that particular task, right? And I think that's where you find like a healthy, sort of like victory oriented form of Mars, as something constructive. Like Mars also, if you read, so one of the Hellenistic authors, Vedius Valens, has a passage where he says that Mars rules people who work with their hands. And like
Mhm.
Mars is like, we often describe Mars as being like a sword, But I was thinking about it like I've worked in construction, I've worked in plumbing, and like the toolkit of like the average construction worker, which has saws, files, nails, screws, screwdrivers, like these are all sharp
Yeah.
martial implements. Um, but they make houses, they fix problems, they make
Mm-hmm.
they make the world a hospitable and livable place, right?
I
Um,
love.
so
Yeah,
Mars
I love
Mars
it.
it finds a home in the trades, right? As mechanics, as day laborers, as blacksmiths, you know. Mars is not just swords, but sword makers, right? Mars shows up in kitchens,
Mm.
right? Mars rules butchers and bakers
Yeah.
and cooks. So, like, no
Somebody said
meal.
astrology in style. Sorry, she said Mars rules knives, but that's what it is. Knives in the
Yeah,
kitchen, knives.
yeah,
Also surgery, knives in surgery. You know,
yeah,
surgeons they use
yeah,
all the
yeah. Mars
scalpels and stuff.
rules Mars rules surgeons too, and like although that's like the body being cut with a knife,
Hmm.
but it is done so as to extract something from the body which is ultimately harmful to it, right?
Yeah,
Um,
interesting.
so, or like I have a friend who is a butcher and has Mars and Scorpio, and that is like doing doing the work of the moon, right? Where you are feeding
Hmm.
people, you're bringing people together, you're making a meal, right? But you're doing it with martial tools. So you're doing it with knives, you know, carving up the carcass of a dead animal, right? Um, so
Interesting.
and like
What,
yeah,
what
so
about martial
that
arts? Sorry, what about martial arts that don't have tools,
mm,
like karate or jiu-jitsu or whatever
sure,
other, you know,
sure. Yeah. I think martial arts are a great expression of Mars as well. I mean, it's like literally in the name. But
yeah,
you're highlighting ones that like don't have nunchucks or
tools. Yeah.
quarter staves or things like that. I think in that point the body is the tool, right? That you know, you're
Hmm.
focusing on your fists, your feet, or just your mere ability to be lithe and agile, to dodge or redirect the energy of your opponent. You know what I mean?
I think that that's where the sign of the Mars comes into
Mm.
action into prominence, because I think we should all do our Mars, not want to be the Aries Mars or the Scorpio
Yeah,
Mars, you know, the good ones. I think we should all find the energies of what our Mars is all about and do our Mars,
totally.
right? Not be something else, right? So, like, I'm just thinking about my husband. He has Mars in Pisces and he loves martial arts.
Oh,
That's why I
cool.
was thinking about it. You know, he's using, you know, this Piscean energy in action,
Mhm.
right? Um,
Does he
just a thought.
practice a form of martial arts that really
Yes,
favors kicking, like kicking?
yes,
Cool.
yeah.
Yeah,
I don't
because
know. I don't know
Pisces
what it's
rules the
called, to be
feet.
honest.
Okay.
I don't know what it's called, his martial art. I don't know, but I'm not very good at those. But he's actually, you know, using his body and
Mhm.
movement of his body, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah.
beautiful. I am someone who is a martial arts admirer and who has wanted to try but never have. But for me, like I said, I have Mars and Libra, so it's like whatever my Mars does, it must do with the tools of Venus, right? So
Or,
I was
or with
reflecting
a
on it, and
partner,
what'd you
or with
say?
a partner, right?
Sure, yeah.
Or with a partner. So you, like a tennis or something that you would, or what is
Mm.
that called? Not archery. The, you know, this with the swords when they play. I don't
Oh,
know English
fencing?
words. Yeah, we just lost them. Sorry,
Fencing?
fencing. That's the word. Yeah, that would
Mm.
be a good one
I
because
like
they
that
you
as
have
an
like a sword.
Yeah, I like
Hmm?
that as a Libran image because, right, like Libra is kind of a mirror, right? And implies there always being like a double, right? Um,
Yeah.
no, so I was reflecting on it and I was like, oh, I've played in a lot of punk and metal bands and
Hmm.
like as a drummer. And I was like, oh, that's where my Mars comes out. I make music, which is a Venusian activity, but all the music I make has a very martial or Saturnian tone to it, right?
But it's
Um,
interesting. As a drummer, you use both hands
yeah,
too. You know, you have two sticks. Like, you know, it's interesting.
no,
Just
yeah,
a thought.
Yeah. No, I like
It's
that.
also Libra, right? It's also Libra, kind of, you have to kind of make, work your right and left side of brain has to work. They have to work
Yeah,
together to make music.
and the feet too. It's a whole balancing act.
Anyway, I digress again, but I'm just thinking about how the sign of Mars can really, I have Mars in Leo, so I have
Mm-hmm.
to be true to myself and be who I
Mm-hmm.
am. Otherwise, if I follow, blindly somebody else, I will never do my Mars properly.
Yeah,
That's how I feel now that I know astrology. I don't know. When I was younger, it was different, but
yeah. And there's a Mars ruled decan in Leo as well, and that decan is one I see as really being devoted to like uh, picking hills to die on, or like leaders who can stand for things and inspire others by taking that stand. Do you know what I'm saying? Like
yeah,
Mars,
that's exactly what I'm trying to do with astrology.
yeah,
This is, kind of what I'm trying to. Yes, exactly. I want to inspire others to learn, not they don't have to practice, but to learn and to know and to use it. So
yeah,
that's why I want to connect people with, and all these lives that I'm doing with other astrologers is to give people the
mm,
choice to see where they see themselves, and what they are
sure.
inspired to do, and learn from, because we're all different. So,
Yeah,
and I love that. One
yeah,
of
it's
those
very
things.
very Leo of you. I'm just gonna shine the spotlight on people.
Uh, oh, thank you. My Leo Mars loves
Yeah, yeah,
it. Yeah. Okay. Cool. I digress, but I'm thinking that the sign is important.
yeah, I agree.
I'm thinking about my brother, for example, has a Mars in Gemini, and
Hmm.
he's a news anchor in Croatia, where we come from. He's using his Gemini, in a Martian way to actually make living, right? So
Yeah,
anyway, he really uses it well, right? So yeah,
totally.
interesting. So yeah, so advice would be don't escape, and don't try to be something else. Be your Mars for sure. I mean, be
Yeah,
your
yeah.
all the planets, but yeah.
But
Okay,
at
go
the end of
ahead.
the day, well, yeah, what I like you're saying is that essentially Mars needs expression. And as someone with Mars in Libra, right? If we want to talk about Mars as anger, Mars anger, it is something that must be expressed because if it is repressed or suppressed, it eventually squeaks out in unhelpful and stranger ways, right? I've been contemplating Mars as anger, and then anger as what I've learned is called like a secondary emotion. Anger as not anger as like an alarm going off or like a defense system in which it's like,
Yeah, yeah.
oh, I feel angry right now, but that is like underneath that, if we follow that feeling, we can see, oh, I feel angry because, oh, my needs have not been met, or I feel slighted, or um, it could be righteous anger, right? I am indignant about the brutalities that I see carried out by my
Mhm.
government or another one, right? And all these like these primary emotions which lie beneath the anger are really what wants to be seen or what wants to be come out, what wants to come out. So it's about finding then a creative outlet for that anger rather than just burying it, right? I think like as someone with Mars and Libra for a long time, it was like it's easy to rationalize away one's anger and like or my
Mhm.
own anger, right? To say, oh, I can kind of see it from their point of view, like the Libran,
Mhm.
I don't know, like the Libran tendency to decenter oneself and be like, well, I can kind of see where they were coming from, and things like that, right? Um, but yeah, as I've gotten older, I've recognized how that does not serve me, and it doesn't serve oftentimes like
Yes.
whatever or whoever I'm angry about. You know what I
You,
mean? And
you
that
need
it,
to express. Yeah,
yeah,
Libran energy often suppresses and doesn't want to get into conflict, and it's not healthy. Yeah, that's for sure. So I
yeah.
know that my Mars in Leo has issues sometimes when my ego is bruised. I can get
Mhm.
angry. So I experienced that a lot, so I'm aware of it now. I'm trying to be more mindful,
Totally.
but sometimes, in the heat of the moment, yeah. There's a question from Barb. Do you think that Saturn conjunct Mars, my aspect, oppress Mars showing up?
Do you think Saturn shows up as something that helps keep a tight lid, or not help, but does keep a tight lid then on your anger?
Because I have Saturn with it, so
Yeah.
it's sometimes, so I can get angry, to be honest. I am not angry for a long time, like Scorpio Mars. I'm not that type, but uh, but uh, 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 it's more of frustration
Sure.
or suppress
Mhm.
Mars. It's more of frustration for not be able to do and be who I am at the time that I want to be. Because
Mm.
remember, I also have a Gemini, which makes me restless.
Mm.
So learning to be patient and learning to understand Saturn and giving it time
Yeah.
to mature, to growth is something that I had to learn through my life, right? Not to
Yeah.
get, because anyway, that's my experience with Mars Saturn conjunction.
This is a
Because you
big
have a
Saturn
trine, you have a
Leo
totally
lesson
different, you
too,
have a
though.
trine, so it's a totally different energy for you,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think for me, the way that's showed up is like when I am setting my Mars to a specific task, I can attack it with a certain relentlessness. Um,
Mhm.
just like going at something super hard without stopping for a certain length of time. You know what I mean? And that was, I think, found its best expression when I did work in the trades or when I was like a line cook, for instance, and it was doing a kind of work that just required like a martial perseverance at all times. Now I
Uh,
work with
uh,
kids and it's a much more lunar, it's a much more mercurial, much more Jupiterian type of job, right? So it doesn't
mhm.
necessarily demand that same like unwavering willpower, you know what I'm saying? So
I know, but you can assert yourself in a way, in a Venusian way. So I don't know if that
sure.
does that make sense.
Yeah, yeah.
uh, my mom had a Mars in Libra, and
Mhm.
she was very, very good at negotiating.
Yeah.
Like she was very good in balancing out two parties and finding the
Mhm.
solution to it. As I remember, I know she passed away a long time ago, but I remember that very well. That she would always kind of when there was something, okay,
Yeah,
let's see
yeah,
both sides, kind of like a judge. She was always,
yeah,
although she wasn't a judge, but she was always having that. So that's a great quality because sometimes we need intermediators like with Mars Libra people to kind
yeah,
of see and make sense of it all because with Mars in Leo get caught up in ego, brr, and then if you have Mars in Aries and then you have Mars in Scorpio, then it can be very hard, right? So
right.
Mars in Libra is actually very good in helping calm down the situation, which is
Yeah,
necessary in many, many situations, right?
yeah. I think like Jupiter and Libra and Mars and Libra are good mediators, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Astrology style is asking, do they sextile my Gemini placement? So only with heaven. So I have Mars Saturn in 24, 20, 25 degrees, and then my
Mhm.
mid heaven 28. So that's the sextile. But in traditional astrology, everything that's Leo is sextiling everything in Gemini anyway,
Exactly.
right? Because it's the house, right?
By
So if
sign,
you look
yeah.
at so I always, do what but the energy, I always, I agree with the traditional, actually
Mhm.
aspect because the energies are there. Fire and air go
Sure.
together. It
Yeah,
doesn't matter which degree in that sense. Maybe they're not as strong in manifestation, but they still work together very well. So
cool.
I would say, I don't know. You have more experience in traditional astrology, but I think that makes sense to me, because this is the energy, right?
Yeah.
What I'm talking about. Cool. So what else do we have? What else to say about Mars? I don't want to
Yeah. I
digress now.
think I wanted to dive a little bit or tease out a little bit more Mars and meals, as I was like saying, like, knives are necessary,
Mhm.
oftentimes to prepare meals, even if you're not eating meat, you need to chop up your vegetables with something. But moreover, like Mars rules heat and iron. And if you're using a cast iron on your stove, if you're using an oven, right? If we think back to like a pre-industrial time, needing to start a fire in a fireplace, right? Like all these like meal times, the enjoying of the meal is definitely Venusian, Jupiterian, or lunar, right? But like the creation of the actual meal requires Mars to get it started, right? And
Absolutely.
like
Now that you mentioned this, this is a great work when Mars and Venus work together in a lovely way, and they
yeah,
produce something.
yeah,
It's not only
they make a
sex.
lovely
I'm just thinking,
meal.
people think about sex, Mars, but produce a child or whatever. Just but this is like also another way
Yeah,
of putting Mars and Venus together in creative way and having a product at the end. I love it.
100%.
I never thought of it that
Yeah,
way.
there's the creative expression of them, right? But then also, so like in the broader field of astrology, there's this like move to embrace some form of animism. So like this is playing with the idea that everything is alive, right? The trees, the stones, the soil, they are the bones of a place, right? And all animals, all planets, all what have you, are some kind of a person, right? You see this, I think, really embodied in like the work of Diana Rose Harper, for instance. So like playing with animism as a worldview. And I was thinking about it as I was camping and cooking over a fire. It's like, okay, like the moon rules the material world. The moon is constant in her inconstancy, right? She's always fluctuating, sometimes bright, sometimes dark. And as such, she's sort of given rulership over our like fluctuating material circumstances, right? And our bodies themselves, which are ruled by the moon, are changing constantly, right? Like every 7 years, you have a new set of cells. You're
It's
like
amazing.
on a material level, you are a new person every 7 years, right? Um,
That's
so like, how does that happen though? Well, you eat food, right? And that the food you eat is used by your body to comprise new cells, and this process happens constantly. So that's the moon's job, right? But then how does that food reach you, right? And that is again through Mars. And if we sit with the idea of animism, it's like, oh wow, everything's alive. I live in a much more crowded and enchanted cosmos. But if you sit with that thought a little bit longer, it's also a little horrifying because you suddenly realize that every mealtime has a little bit of violence baked into it, right?
yeah.
You continuing to live is contingent upon something else dying, right?
Because
Like,
we are actually chewing food. I'm thinking chewing is also action, Mars, right?
yeah,
So we are literally, you know,
yeah, like your
anyway.
especially like your incisors, which are much more pronounced and more predatory animals. Your incisors are they have evolved so as to rend and rip meat, right? So there's this very like primal martial thing about meal times. And one thing I've discovered in charts with clients who have either debilitated, like, Mars in Cancer or like Scorpio moons, is a lot of the time those placements will wrangle with vegetarianism, veganism, and the ethics of eating because they're people who are keenly aware of the violence baked into meal times and then try to seek out, well, what is the ethical way of approaching this? You know what I mean? You know
That
what I
is
mean?
so interesting. That
Yeah,
is so interesting. Wow. Maybe you should really do a study on it, like, gather more information.
yeah.
You know, all those vegans out there, please
Submit
contact Caleb.
submit your chart to me.
No, but
Yeah,
seriously, I think you should really do a study. People make studies on a bunch of stuff. This is so interesting. I never thought of it that way at all.
yeah,
Like as astrology style says, eating is ruled by Mars. It is because it's action and chewing. But I never thought
yeah,
that some placements actually show this um, um tendency towards eating and food. I mean, okay, cool. I love it.
yeah,
Go
yeah.
ahead.
So it's a fun thought to think with, and I say all this as someone with a Scorpio moon, and I spent many years as a vegetarian, many years as a vegan, and in college, like, wrote several essays, kind of like really trying to plumb the depths of this, and then like, yeah, only recently figured out, oh, there's like a whole astrological angle here, right? So yeah, maybe I will hone more closely in on that sometime in the future.
I'm thinking I have a friend with the Mars in Cancer and Scorpio moon, and he doesn't like food. I'm a foodie, for example. I like to experience and
Yeah,
try.
yeah.
He just like give me. I want something simple I can just survive. I don't, he's not at all interested in all of that. It's just not. Anyway.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so like some of the points I wanted to cover was like, yeah, Mars in mealtime, Mars as something constructive, Mars demanding expression, Mars as anger, and the last would be Mars and the need to stand apart or stand out, right? So I was thinking the other day about how Jupiter and Venus, their virtues are like that they bring things together. They are the benefic planets. And I realized that implies in astrology to some degree that it is good, like that unity is good, right? Or there's an assumption there, right? That unity is good. Venus loves to join things together. Jupiter loves to create all-encompassing wholes, right? Like systems of belief that can encompass many people. So they value inclusion, right? And that means that by contrast, the malefics value exclusion. And I think that the Saturn version of that is like, being an outcast, like a social outcast, or like a social butterfly, or something like that, or not butterfly, like a wallflower, right? Somebody
Yeah, yeah,
who's
yeah,
at
yeah.
the edge or the
Yeah, I'm
periphery.
just thinking, yeah, because Mars ruled by Aries or Scorpio, it is about me or individuality. Even Scorpio doesn't mind being on its own if his needs are
Mhm.
not,
Right.
met in the way they want, right? So
Yeah.
it's interesting, yeah,
Yeah.
in the
I think
rulerships, yeah.
Mars stands out in a much more um, assertive way versus Saturn, right? I'm saying like Saturn is just like those who aren't seen, those on the edges of the periphery, whereas like Mars standing out is like the fist raised, in protest, right? It is the decision to stand apart or stand out from the crowd that is often like a vulnerable action to take, right? But oftentimes is necessary because you create a path, right? Like Aries blazes trails, you create a path for other people to follow, right? Um, there's
Fist raised
this,
Joe.
yeah, there's like this weird passage in Vedic Valens as well, where he's talking about like the significations of Mars, and one of them he says is Mars rules walking backwards. Well, like the Greek word is like anapodismo, I think. But that's the same term that Hellenistic authors use to describe retrogrades. Like the literal phrase is planets walk backwards, and I think
I love.
like yeah, like astronomically speaking, a retrograde is weird because visually speaking, the planet is moving backwards across the sky, right? They are moving against the grain. So I realized like the reason Mars would rule, like there's a suggestion there, right? That Mars rules all retrogrades, or at least like the stress associated with retrogrades is somehow related to Mars. And I realized it's because like Mars values going against the grain, standing in opposition to what maybe the crowd is doing, and being willing to like call out the complacency of the mainstream, if it's just
Being
uh,
alert. This is the
yeah.
word that just come to my mind. Like Mars wants to be alert. It's always alert, right?
Hmm.
Just that a thought.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, that's a good one. I think vigilance is another word that comes to mind as well. Like being alert, being vigilant, being watchful. Um, there's a motto that I adopted a long time ago: stay hungry. It's a line in like a Bob Dylan song, but what it means to me is like like when you're in a hungry state, like if you think about the prowling predators suggested by Scorpio, when you're in a state of hunger, you have keener senses. You are far more driven, but after you eat, you're usually more lethargic, right? You don't care as much, you know, so there's value to the state of hunger, um, because you are like, I think you're like with animals, they are more dangerous in that state, right? More,
Uh,
um, you know what
yes.
I mean?
Do you know what? Did you know what you just reminded me of? You know how many
Is that,
people, successful people, came from poverty, from hunger.
yeah, yeah,
You know, and then they succeeded because they didn't have anything, and they were so hungry for things.
mm,
I'm just thinking
no,
about it. It's like a
yeah,
anyway, like
no, that's
a
good.
thought.
Yeah, and I think if you there's something to the notion, right, that the best, oftentimes like the best music and works of art can kind of come from that state of hunger or like a state of desperation.
Yes,
Um, it's
yes.
um, this like kind
There's
of
a sense
joke.
there's a sense I have nothing to lose if I don't go,
Sure,
if
yeah,
I don't go forward. You know, what I'm saying, like I have nothing to lose, and then you just go, right?
yeah, and like at times also this compulsion, like I must get this out, like I have to kind of see this thing through to completion. And yeah, often what comes out of that moment or that state of hunger is, things that are beautiful, compelling, and visceral, right? Another Mars keyword. And I think that's why, like you see with like artists, there's like a joke that like once they get successful, especially if they do play something like punk or metal, once they get successful, it's not as good as it was when they were just like young, scrappy, and hungry. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like, well, what do they have to be
Yes.
angry about now? They've got
Yeah.
great houses and great
Do you know,
paychecks, right? So,
do you recall when people talk about, for many artists, they say, oh, their early work was so good, you know?
yeah,
They always say, oh, the early work was, and after that, it's not so good
sure,
as well, right? Because
yeah,
it's that hunger, Martian hunger in
yeah,
the early work. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
But
Makes
I think that's
completely
not to say
sense.
that you can't stay connected to that or cultivate that somehow. I think there are obviously artists who've defied that or who have
Oh,
gotten
yeah,
better
yeah.
with age, but it's about
Yeah, I'm not
perhaps
saying in
continuing to
general.
find, yeah, you got to continue to find where is the edge of challenge, like continuing to push to discover what is the razor's edge in my craft or in my field, right? Any of us can become complacent in whatever our general domain is. We can become complacent as astrologers, kind of setting in our ways or in our techniques or whatever.
Absolutely.
And that's why it's so valuable to listen to other voices, to try out new techniques and things like that to discover like, brand new tools that could completely shift how we read charts or work with our clients, right?
Absolutely, I agree. Look at me. That's why I love all these connections. Absolutely agree with you. This was such an interesting chat, Caleb.
Yeah,
I don't know. I learned so much from you. I have to have you again for something. Please pick another topic. This is so interesting.
I'd
Uh,
love to.
just for me now to look at Mars in different ways. Like you opened my mind, and I have like a food for thought, right?
Yeah.
Today I'm going to think about Mars in a different way. Really, really interesting. um, I love it. I know. I think you can be inspiration for many people out there, for other astrologers as well. Guys, if you don't follow Caleb, please go Heavy Metal Astro. And I want to give a shout out to my astro friend Katrina. She introduced me to you. She's always
Oh,
sending
cool.
me, oh, this is interesting. She's like searching the net for me. She's always connecting me to interesting
Mhm.
astrologers. Um, this was so good. Thank you so much. I know it's very early for you. I appreciate your time
My pleasure.
and knowledge and insights. Do you have any final thoughts before we close this chat?
Ah, I will say no closing thoughts immediately spring to mind. Besides, like, just remember we started the chat talking about the upcoming Mars Sun
Mhm.
Cazimi. So just put that in the back of your mind that that is coming on November 17th, and it's worth contemplating until then. What were the last 2 years
Mhm.
battles about, and as you prepare for like a new season of campaigns in your life, like what do you find or like is most worth fighting for, right? And kind of sitting with those questions as we approach that conjunction.
Yeah, so yeah, which fights are valuable enough for you? So a little bit of Mars Venusian things together.
Yeah,
Which fights are valuable enough for you to fight, and which you need to let go? Because we have
yeah.
still South Node in Libra, you know,
Mhm.
letting go of things as well. Because
Totally.
Venus is going to come to South Node in Libra soon as well. So she's
Don't
gonna
remind me.
again, she's gonna make us do another one. First, she was retrograde this on the summer or during the summer and this
Yeah.
and that. Anyway, uh, things are letting go. But thank you very much. So guys, pick up your fights smartly and wisely. Use
Right.
that energy wisely in the next 2 years. Thank you so much, Caleb. I appreciate it. And hope to talk to you soon in some other
Likewise.
topic.
My pleasure, and thank
Thank
you
you
for
all.
having me on. I appreciate it. Cool.
No, I love it. I love it. Thank you everybody for joining and for interacting and asking questions. And I love having this Astro chats.
Hmm.
Great way to start the Sunday, in my opinion. So everybody have a great day.
Yes, you
Yeah, and talk to
too.
you soon.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.